Tēnā koutou e te iwi, nau mai ki tēnei wahanga o Kōrero Toi. Nei rā ngā pau e rua o te ao toi Māori, me aku mihi kia kōrua, nau mai I waingi a tātou, Darcy, kōrua ko Rangi, nau mai ki tēnei rangi. Me tā mātou koa, kia whakapiri mai kōrua me te tākoha I a kōrua o kōrua mātauranga. He kōrero hoki e pāna ki tā kōrua mahi ngā toi, me te ao toi Māori. Nei rā te mihi. Kia ora Darcy, kōrua ko Rangi.
Kia ora.
Awesome to have you both here today, and I think we're just going to go straight into the kōrero session, ka pai. And firstly, I'll just introduce you, Darcy, to the people who are watching. And those of you that are watching, there's a chat area there, so feel free to add any questions. At the end of the session, we'll have a question and answer period where we can answer some of your questions and throw some hard ones to Darcy and Rangi. They'll have the answers, I'm sure. So with that, I'll just introduce Darcy, even though, you know, he's extremely well known in Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Toi. But Darcy from Te Atiawa Nui Tonu, Ngāti Rua Nui, Tangahoi, and Tauranga Moana, Ngāti Haua Hoki. Darcy was born in Waitara, Taranaki, and Darcy has been actively involved in the contemporary Māori art movement since the late 1960s. He exhibited throughout New Zealand, Australia, Africa, United States, France, India, Britain, Germany, Netherlands, and Canada. His work is held in many private collections throughout the world, as well as private and public. Darcy won a Creative Wellington Award in 2005 for his services to the arts in the Greater Wellington region. He also served as the Director of Community and Cultural Services for Porirua City from 1993 through to 2012, and was the visionary behind the creation of Pātaka Museum, for which in 2010 he was made a Companion of the Queen's Service Order, QSO, for his services to museums. And in 2013, he was given the Supreme Award for Māori Arts, Te Tohu Mo Te Ariki Dame, Te Atairangi Kahu, Te Waka Toi Exemplary Award. So with that, I'd like to put the space here over to you, Darcy, and would love to hear about your kōrero, about your art, and actually anything that you'd like to talk about today. Tēnā koe e te rangatira. Kei a koe te wā.
Yeah, kia ora, Regan. I've got my son here just showing me how to handle the stuff, and because I've got this stuff on, I can't hear what he's talking about. So I hope you'll watch me, James. Kia ora, everyone. I guess I've been creating art before most of you were alive, because I sold my first painting when I was 9 years of age. And at that age, I was introduced to a person called Orowaru Arts, who was probably one of the first of our real contemporary painters. And Orowaru came and saw me at home and told me that I would have a big career in the arts, because he saw. And I must admit, I started doing graffiti to start with, because I used to use charcoal to do drawings all over the family toilet and stuff like that, and outside. But I was encouraged all the way along with my art. And then I went through Waitara High School and decided I'd sit my preliminary diploma in fine arts, and I got it. And then in the sixth form, the careers advisor, who happened to be the art teacher, told me, "I'm sorry, Darcy, but there's no such thing as a career in the arts." And just by chance, some of my mates were leaving high school at a time when they were supposed to go to class, and I asked, "Where were you going?" And they said, "Oh, we're going down to join the police. Why don't you come with us? We have a great time." So I went down and I sat the exams, and I was the only one who passed. And I told my dad, "Dad, I've been accepted in the police." He didn't know about it. And he said, boy, when did that happen? And I said, well, I told him the story, and I ended up in the New Zealand Police, and that's where I started my art career. I created the identikit process, and then I got shoulder tapped into starting the police youth aid section. So I did that. Then I took a year's leave without pay, and I went to Melbourne, and my work was well accepted there when I was about 27 by then. It was well accepted in Melbourne, and they encouraged me to become a full-time artist. So I got back and resigned and opened a gallery, all my Australian works. And on the Sunday before I opened, this African-American guy tapped on the window and came in. He was a car dealer, and he had a look around. Then he rushed across the road to buy a hamburger, and then came back and said, do you mind if I buy the lot? And I said, there's what, 35 paintings? And he said, yes. He said, just let me know how much. So he ran out and came back with all this cash and put it on the table. And that's how I started my art career. And 4 times now I've sold to just the one buyer. My London exhibition I sold to the Goldsmith family. And at that time, Sir James was probably the richest man in the world. Sir James Goldsmith and John Aspinall. The movie Goldfinger was made on John, and he hosted my exhibition. And they advised me on how to develop my art career. And I've sold over 8,000 artworks since then, mainly all over the world. And it was through listening to their advice, and they told me how to market my work, how to expose it, and they gave me a lot of publicity both here and overseas. And unfortunately, this lockdown thing has meant that a lot of the overseas galleries and buyers have sort of retracted. So a lot of my work here is now selling to New Zealanders, who've never had the chance. So, and a lot of them happen to be Maori, which is good, and senior executive positions. So it's been quite interesting. Just seeing it all. But I've got involved in some of the protest things that we're having at Parliament, and mainly as a mediator between the police and the demonstrators and the mayor, and also at Mahunga Bay. I'm just going to show you this picture here that I've done of Mahunga Bay. That's some of our most ancient. Oops. James is just showing me. Yeah, that's some of our most ancient history. Is that place? They call it the Miramar Peninsula, but I wanted them to know that it's actually a taniwha, because it has our ancient history, and we need to understand that. And I wanted to give some sort of inspiration to our people who are there, but at some stage they have to move out of it. Can you change that out again, Jane? Put me back on the screen. At some stage they have to move out of that, and I just need to show them how to retreat strategically, like we did in the land wars. We retreated strategically into the forest, and Matarikiriko was an ancient pass site, but it was taken by the soldiers. And when they started bringing that's our urupa, when they started bringing the cannons up, our people retreated into the forest, and they couldn't take the cannons in there. And then that land war went on for a whole year, and the soldiers were losing too many people. So Wiremu Tamihana came in, and he negotiated the peace. And Tamihana, on my dad's side, he was my great-grandmother's brother. And so that's my Ngāti Hoa connection, was through Te Waro. So we have the situation where the people who were our enemies, because Te Waro was one of the chiefs in there killing my mum's people. And some of the old people said their marriage was one of a peaceful marriage between the two races. And I've been sort of raised on a lot of that history about parihaka, about what it really means, and how it was supposed to have developed and evolved. So that's in all of my paintings. Yeah, and my career has sent me many times around the world now. working with American Indians, Japanese, Canadian, Africans, people in Asia, Australia, Aborigines, Americans, people through Europe, down into Italy, all of that. And when I lost my wife recently, we had wonderful messages from around the world. You came in. I mean, that's now my next series, is the relationship between a man and a woman, husband and wife, and how they're like the earth and the sky. Because without that complementary relationship between earth and sky, we're in major trouble. So we have to do things that are complementary. Show one of those like this, you see. Yeah, this is basically a relationship between a man and a woman. And I've only just finished this. This is a series I'm working on that haven't been seen publicly. And just show a couple more names. Yeah, the series and the others. Yeah. Yeah, all right, it's okay. And go back again to the beginning, so I can see everyone. There's sort of the series of things I'm working on. They haven't been seen anywhere before. They're just in my house, and they just basically tell my story and the story that my elders handed down to me, and so this is what's happened. And I'm doing a series of carvings called my Black series, which is basically pieces carved in stone, and I painted them black, and then I've put a series of red on them just to create that, like the beginning of the dawn of a new age, and just pushing into cutting edge stuff of the arts, because my art teacher was a guy called Sam Keencross, and Sam was actually living in, he was from Porirua, but one of the golden things about him in the 60s is when just after the war, he lived in Paris, and he used to have coffee regularly with Picasso and Braque and all those people, and he always told me about them, and he changed my way of thinking and said, Darcy, if you want to be an artist of any value, you have to compete with the best in the world. And at that stage, Picasso was really interested in Maori and Pacific art, Polynesian art. And that's why I always wanted a Picasso. So when I sold a lot of paintings in Canada, I just got that money, and I went from Canada into America, and then I just thought, oh, okay, I'm going to buy this, you know. And my granddaughter wants it, so I said, when I'm ready, my darling, you can have it, you know. So that's what we do, you know. And the samurai sword was one of my other great treasures, because I'd always been fascinated with Japanese combat, and particularly the samurai sword and the spirit behind the sword. And I got one that belonged to one of the 92-year-old master, and I went over to Japan, and they'd seen a copy of my book, and they liked the look of my dad. They said, this is a fine-looking man, you know. And they invited me to this launch of all the top samurai sword makers in Japan. And they treated me like royalty, because I had James there. And James, my son, speaks fluent Japanese. Plus he's ex-basketball, he's 6'6". And he can read kanji and write kanji. And he'd been playing professional basketball over there for the city of Saitama, which is a city of about 10 million people. So I sort of got in the front door and said, I'd love to own a real Japanese sword. And so they took me to one there, and I didn't realize they were all up to $1 million each. And the one I picked was a really expensive one. And the Japanese, being the Japanese, I love the Japanese. They had this conference, and they said, oh, Darcy-san, how much do you have? And I sort of thought, oh my God, I've got a gold card. And I said, 15,000 US. And they looked, and they went away and had another conference and came back and bowed low, and they agreed to it. But in order for it to be delivered to me, it had to go through Japanese customs. and rituals first, and they brought it here, and then I received it. It was given to me with a big low bow in my office, and I took it home, and I decided I would transfer its name to Awhirangi. So I called it Awhirangi, the first blade of light that separates the earth from the sky, and swished it around sort of down in my deck, and then I contacted them and told them what I'd done, and they sent me a very honourable letter thanking me very much. So the deal was done. You know, there's some of the wonderful stuff you learn from other cultures, you know, when you live with them, and all of that has a big impact on my art and what I'm doing at the moment. Yeah, so, and I've met all the storytellers of all those different cultures. So I've just done a big painting called The Storyteller, which was in there somewhere. Yeah, this. James.
Darcy, we can still see you when you've got your image up.
Oh, you can still see me. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is The Storyteller, and it's my journeys all around the world and the different storytellers I met, and also some of the work I did at Kōrero Toi. Some of the images come there, and that basically tells the story of what I'm painting, you know, and the people I met, and I've created Maori clowns and stuff like that, and realized the clown is not a fool. The clown is a wise person in a lot of cultures who can take on the identity of whoever they want to take on. And I thought I'd love to use that image in some of my paintings, but this painting here, The Storyteller, is basically an abstract painting of myself and my adventures around the world. Can you remove that now? So I can.
Not that one.
No. Oh, this one here is the woman Ronga and her whole history, which I've studied and followed through. And she was clearly taken by Toi Kairako, or a lot of his people, and given to Ruarangi, Toi Kairako's daughter. And she was a beautiful woman of substance, and the matriarch of our Te Atiawa tribe. And the imagery that I put around there are things like the shark and the eye, and a lot of symbols I used of eternal warriors and the relationship between us and the Kahui Maunga people. So you see three sort of triangles there, and the emergence and disappearance and the evolution of a whole lot of things that happen to us as people, the emergence of new things. So there's a lot of abstraction and hidden images in a lot of that painting. Take it back so I can see everyone now.
Yeah, that one.
Oh, and this one here is, those who know me know that I'm not only my very strong Maori side, but I accept my English, Irish, Scottish and French side as well. And because of that, I study all those cultures and all their art movements, and I absorb and take their art, and I make it part of my Maori art scene. So that's one I've just been quietly working on. But it's one of a number of paintings I've done of myself. I see myself only as Maori, but I acknowledge all those English ancestors, Scottish, because they came in defence of us. Like John Agar Love was my 4 grades grandfather, and he married Mereruru Hikanui, who was one of the ariki of Te Atiawa, who you'll find whakapapa to many of our leaders in Te Atiawa. So there's a whole lot of that stuff. And I was saying to Tamaho, and I said to my brother Gary, the problem we have today as artists is we're working in isolation. And a lot of the stuff that we have are basically personifications, they're not realities. And they illustrate our history. They say who we are. And there were things like, I was talking to a group of Maoris, and I said, you know, some of our people, because I heard them say it in New York, some of our carvers said, you realize that man created woman. And I had to stop it and say, no, that's bullshit. You know, this was in New York. And they looked at me and I said, what makes you say that? And said, well, Tane's a man. I said, no, Tane, if you forget about the English language, I said, has many different meanings to it. And Tane, in that sense, I'm told by the Tongas in Hawaii and also in our own people, that Tane in that context is the radiance of the sun. And the radiance of the sun shines on the damp earth, and life is born from Hini Ahuane, I said. And that's the story that I was told by my elders and by their elders, some who, like my dad, if he lived today, would be about 120, you know, and people forget that, that those elders like my dad and that were raised by other people, you know, who knew a lot of stuff, and some of them still maintain that pure language. And as I traveled around the Pacific and amongst the American Indians, they had similarities and they had their stories of coming into the Pacific and being part of us. And some told me that a lot of the Tahitians were related to the Native Americans who were just off the coast of America. So I visited those people, and people like Harry Fonseca, who was one of their top artists, was explaining to me how they're really what we call the Tahitians, and they came down into the Cook Islands and down into my country. So they then came here and visited us, and they said, we understand all of this, similar languages too. So that's all the stuff I've discovered over the years and what I put into my art. Yeah, that's why it might look different to all those who want to sort of surrounded with what they call coming from the tradition. I like to go in deeper into what our real tradition is. Yeah, that's what I paint, what I create. That's how I get involved in all these things, because I'm working with a lot of our young artists or young people now who want to know what's the real story of Motukairanga, you know. And I happen to know the real story of that. That's what I've been researching. So I get involved in all of this. But that's all about how we get our land back. So I'm working with them today. I have to meet them today and say, how can you handle this in a way that we retain our dignity? And they all want to get arrested. And I'll share this with you now. What I'm going to suggest to them is, can we find one woman who will stand there with her kakahu on and be arrested? And the rest of you, stand back in support. And that's a symbol of our land. So I'll see how that goes. See if they agree. But you'll hear about it. But I think, hand this to you now, Rangi.
Tēnā koe, Darcy. Your mahi and your kōrero is true testament, an example for us in the power of art and being able to share our stories through our mahi, also to move people through those stories that are shared in your work and in ngā mahi toi. And I remember being in a wānanga, and I was very privileged to be there, because you said at the time you don't give wānanga just to anybody, only in your own iwi.
Yeah.
And a lot of things you said at that wānanga were so profound to me, but very common sense. Like one thing you said was, you weren't the best artist at school in your class, but the difference was that the people who the art came naturally, they didn't pursue that. So they put their artworks under their bed or didn't push, but the difference was that you worked really hard. So it didn't just happen. You worked really hard in your craft and you researched so deeply. So the reason why your work is so rich also because you've researched about all those stories, you really understand them from so many different perspectives, and you're able to share that.
Our advantage is our culture, and people should not believe that it was all light and we had gods and spirits and angels and devils and all that. Our culture is much richer than that. It is universal, it is very ancient, and it has a depth that goes beyond what a lot of people follow today. And my big advantage was our culture. I took it seriously. I was fascinated by it and also deeply moved by it. It's universal. And I found as I travelled around all the other Indigenous cultures that they understood it, but they didn't quite want to take that next step. And I helped a lot of them take the next step. And that's why I have what I call brothers and sisters from another mother. And they live all around the world. And they're very dear friends. Some have passed away. But they understood the universality of life, which we understand as Maori people, that we go into the depth of our real culture. That's what I was raised on.
It's so wonderful to share that, Darcy. Thank you. We'll just ka huri te tirohangi nainei kia koe Rangi, tēnā koe e hoa. So just a bit of an introduction about Rangi Kipa. Rangi is te Atiawa, Ngāti Tama ki te Tauihu, and Ngāti Maniapoto. He is actually a renowned sculptor, carver, and tāmoko artist. And when you say Rangi Kipa, most people know who he is, especially in terms of refining an art form. And if you see his forms, he'll show them today, the most intricate forms and carving. So Rangi, it's awesome to have you here. Just Rangi was also raised in Waitara, Darcy. So there's that strong connection between.
Do you realise that Rangi's father and I were the front row of the Waitara High School first 15? I know all about Rangi. That's who we were. Bert and I were the front row, and we were fearless, okay? Like Bert's son is.
Beautiful whanaungatanga. Rangi first trained as a carver at Maraeroa Carving School in Kōrero, and then later completed a Master of Māori Visual Arts at Massey University. He has since forged a practice that investigates how customary Māori motif, materials and techniques can be re-envisioned in a kōrero between past and present. But Rangi, I'll just hand the kōrero over to you because it will sound so much better coming from your mouth. Tēnā koe e hoa.
Tēnā koe Regan. O te atura ka mihi rā kia koe e taku papa e Darcy nau rā I whakapua ki tā tātou ranga kōrero I tēnei rā, kei te hoki nā mahara ki nā tini wānanga, nā tini kōrero e kōrerotia nei e tātou e tāua meki. Just wanted to meet you, Darcy. There's been a number of times where I can document or remember pivotal conversations that we've had where you've changed my orbit actually of my thinking too. So I remember one particular time, I think was after your tenure with the South Pacific Arts, but I remember there was a time when I had a problem letting go of my work. And I think partially because my output was so pitiful at that stage, whereas I tend to I can really churn work out now. But I had an attachment to my work where I would struggle to let it go. And I remember a conversation with you when you said, "Oh, it doesn't matter where my work goes; it's always a Darcy Nicholas," and that really stuck in my head at that time because I started to realise that that the extent of the artistic enterprise that we are engaged in is not only, even though you might create it and bid it farewell, let it go into the care of somebody else, whether it's an individual collector or a relative or an institution, that thing carries, your mauri, I suppose, and the mana of your practice and those that have gone before us as practitioners and have helped lay the foundation of what we do and charge us with the responsibility of moving forward into the future. I think the thing that's most attractive that has always kind of stunned me because growing up in a parochial kind of Aotearoa, partially I think because of our geographic isolation, we can get really parochial. We can get really bound by boundary. I think by our thinking, And one of the things that's always been really freeing and appealing is the idea of your universalism. You know, whenever I listen to you talk, Darcy, it's always about universal principles. They're really, really freeing. That I suppose has always stuck with me, and part of has become part of my practice about not being restricted by customary boundaries that we think are there. Because, you know, part of and I think I'm heavily influenced by my social science training that I took up a number of years after I finished at carving school, where I started to realise that that part of our job is really to be, you know, that te maiti whati toki that breaks the sacred adze, so that we can actually shape a new future, because the past might serve us, but considering our you know, the colonial constructs that we've been living in, the greatest job I think that we've got is to actually be like your Joker character, and that always you know, that always, and a lot of Native American societies have that particular character, that when they're doing their rituals, that character comes out and is given life and goads and teases and challenges us. So I think, you know, if I look at my career, I, you know, considering
You can't make it by yourself, eh?
no.
Yeah, you need, there's certain people, if you have a vision of what you want to do with your art, when a certain person turns up, you don't miss the opportunity, and that takes you on the next stage of your journey. It's like a vehicle arrives, and then you jump on that vehicle, and you grow with it. You grow with it. And I've watched Rangi's career, and it's become wonderful. It's a wonderful journey.
I think, you know, considering the history of the last 100 and something years for our people, I think that you know, I long to see change. I really long to see our people flourish.
Yes.
And you know, grow. So you know, so I envision a different future, and so it's part of the reason why I covet change, I suppose, and I proactively seek to bend and warp our creative expressions so as to stretch the space, so as to create and accommodate the opportunity for us to shape new language around what our future might be for our tamariki makopuna.
Yes.
And I think the arts is something that if we give it the freedom to step outside those boundaries, can quite easily you know, give the freedom to our communities to start looking at new opportunities. So I don't know, that probably is a fundamental kind of principle in my thinking that influences my methodology and my practice. But you know, I'm always looking for new media, and in reality, it's not like people are inventing new stuff every day. So you've got to, you know, for instance, when Solid Surface Korean came on the scene, I leant into that space only because I was doing my masters through Toyohiki Apati, and I had kind of got to a point where I'd plateaued on bone and whale teeth, and wood didn't seem to challenge me that much anymore. So I was looking for a new material, and so that was a really has been an interesting, and I'm still leaning into that space. Oh, I should show you some images. So, and I'm just going to roll through. Moko, you know, Moko was something that was appealing to me mainly because politically it motivated this idea that I knew that Pākehā people were always going to, they struggled with Moko, partially because it invokes all of the insecurities of that come out of a society or a community having to reconcile themselves with our conflict period. And of course, this is one of the ways by which you can almost, it's like flicking a switch and stepping back in time and pulling back moko into our, it serves a couple of purposes. One is it restores, it's a language that gives, that is able to restore all of the narrative around relationship of ourselves as individuals to each other, or to our whānau, hapu, iwi structures, as well as relationship to the whenua, because all of our kōrero are in and around moko, and the designs that moko carries is the symbols and symbology of our interrelationship with our environmental world, with our taiao. So I always knew that moko would be, given the time and given the energy, would be one of the things that overtly expresses back out to Te Ao Pākehā that we are native peoples, that we are tribal nations, that we are sovereign people, and that we belong here. We are the land. And so that's what's always driven my engagement with moko. I'm just rolling on to now a range of imagery around solid surface, or people call it Korean, but actually it goes by a whole range of different names. It's just a brand name that DuPont used. And I've used it in all sorts of applications. This one here, you can see I made a whole range of taonga out of whale's teeth, and then I got them cast in bronze. And then they sit and are mounted on these Korean inserts, yellow ones, inside blue panels. And they carry a particular narrative for this guy here, who's a Belgian dude that lives in Wanaka that owns restaurants. So it's all built around the idea of manakitanga. So I mean, I cross a whole range of different genres, I suppose, and this is the beginning of a design for a medal for Pukeariki. Korean Heitiki, this one's in Pukeariki as well, in the collection. I'm working on these Kowhai Ngutu Kaka Kaperua design work for the new archives building that's going in on the Pipitea site, the old Pipitea site in Wellington. This is actually the first large Korean work that I did for Ministry of Business and Innovation. And initially they contacted me when they were moving into their new Stout Street building. They said, they commissioned, they contacted me and said, would you do a pare for our new building? And I said, yeah, but I said, you're the Ministry of Business and Innovation. Why don't you let me do something innovative? And they said, what are you thinking? I said, let me do something like bright pink. And
it's lovely. It's lovely
yeah.
piece.
In the end, I didn't have enough pink, so I used this mandarin color, and I called it Tatau Te Haiata, which is this work here. And it's and I'm using the color really to reference the rising of a new day. The orange pink kind of sunrise in the morning. So we have a whare marae down in Wellington called Tatau Te Po, so I called this Tatau Te Haiata. And you can see here some other different studies, and these were upoko in preparation for a new series of works that I did for the Plymouth Airport, Te Honu. So I'm just trying out, I'm trying to extend the depth of my work, and how I do this stuff only comes in 12 mil thick. And so I have to glue it together and machine it, and then grind it back and sand it and polish it, and it's quite a large investment of work anyway. But the interesting thing about this stuff is that it's really heavy, it's really solid, and it's inert, so it'll last 1,000 years. You can see it here, roughly worked before I polish it, and you can kind of see the layers. I'm not sure. Yeah, can you see my cursor? You can see some of the layers there where I've glued it and haven't yet shaved it away, inserting the eyes, and then I put power into that. And what I developed was this technique where I cut away using the same tool that I use for bone carving, and then fill it. And I've gone on to kind of develop that to a different degree where I start filling it with different color. This piece is a work for Te Papa's collection that I did finished a couple of years ago. It's about 2 meters 10 high, so it's tall and narrow. they commissioned myself and a couple other people around the country to do contemporary popo, to go into the collection of Te Papa with all of the other ancestral popo that are in the collection. So they said to me, they asked me to do it out of Korea, and I said, I'll only do it if I can do it in hot pink. And this time I actually managed to execute it. So you can see here, and this is Tamaro. So Darcy will talk about Rongo, and this is Rongo second partner, Tamaro, of which they beget Awenui Rangi. And so
Tamaro
and
te hekatanga rangi.
Yep. And so I think there's a detail here. So you can see this piece here is where is that? It's somewhere over here, I think. And so you can see. So what I've done is I now what I do is I tint this inlay that I do, so I can kind of tint it to any color. There you go. So you can see some kind of detail there. That took ages, but you know, just continuing to try and push the narrative along, push our expressions along, change our color palette, and of course, if you look at Darcy's work, heavy influencer of mine. This piece was for the Auckland Museum, and I've turned this pare kind of upside down because it references it's gone into the I've forgotten the name of the gallery, but they opened it a couple of years ago, and it commemorated kind of Passchendaele and our participation in the World Wars. And so that's in Nui Te Po, and there's a big empty cavity in here, and she's turned actually upside down. I've basically inverted it because, you know, those wars were devastating for us. So it's and you can see these down here. These, well, hard to see in black with high gloss, but it's expressed in the Ngapuhi Northland style. And getting on to smaller whakakai work here, I think the thing, even though you guys might notice the tiki, actually the thing that I probably noticed more is trying to move the aho along as well. So about 3 years ago, I did a study with a friend, Isaac Teawa, and my daughter Kaifetu, and we just basically spent hours and hours and hours developing different beading sequences, or it's not beading sequences, sorry, plaiting sequences to give different patterns. So, and then I'd cut them and put them into a book with all of the sequencing, so that I've got about, I don't know, maybe a dozen pages of all sorts of different colors with different sequences to create different patterns just in the aho. Because, you know, there's a whakatauki that says te rei me tōna mana, te tiki me tōna aho, and the mana of a tiki is actually, or should be, referenced and shown and embellished in the quality of the aho. So as I go along and kind of get to a point where I get bored with that, I look for, well, what's the next point of departure that I can continue to push our practice. I really like that little pink heitiki. It's a nice piece. This is the airport work, and later on I think I've got some, this is and I've used parts of that same design work into the toilet. So I've been working on I started about 7 or 8 years ago, started to get bored with moko. It wasn't being as aggressive as what I wanted it to be, and I kind of figured I'd done my time, and there was a new couple of generations, at least, of people coming through under me that would push it somewhere. So I started looking for a new challenge, and when I looked at the build infrastructure, that's when I started to analyze, I suppose, the influence of the way in which the colonial infrastructure shapes our perception of our world. And here in Taranaki, for the most part, you can drive for a couple of hours and not see anything Māori. And so I really started to try and focus on how I might build my language and use my ability in that space. So the airport job became really my first major point of work, and trying to embed our work into the infrastructure of the building. So right from the landscape layout, the choice of flora, even right through to the ceilings, the fretwork, the manifestations, the ini whakairo, you know, all of that sort of stuff, so that visual languages were actually embedded into the building rather than the approach which has been, previous in my career. It's always been accessorizing buildings. They'll design everything and then they'll ask you to come along and put up a carving. I think we've definitely moved past that now. And so these were some of the works that myself, my younger brother Glenn, and my daughter Kaiwhetu developed and worked on. This really old taranaki pai style.
Awesome.
Is used in the building, and then we did these really large, probably like a 70-meter long vinyl work with stitch tukutuku inside them as well. And then these pare forms. So one half of the building is the works are realised in yellow to represent Tamarau, Noronge Te Rangi. So the yellow obviously connects back to the rays of the sun and that celestial oranges. And the purple that you saw before is the female reference of Rongoerua being of the Earth Maiden and referencing the Napuka hebe species that was endemic to the site where the airport is. These turned out really, really nice. So you can see here, that's one of them. Oh, yeah. So it takes four of them to lift that. So it's quite heavy, but trying to tie, I suppose, and give life to our narrative so that when people come and welcome or farewell visitors from our rohe in Taranaki, that they get, I suppose, as they get an expression anyway of who we are in today's world, living in today's world. So yeah, and so you can see there, even in the toilets, we've tried to move that expression even right through the building. So and I'm probably getting into some of the smaller stuff here. Uhi, I just managed to bang these up a couple of weeks ago. I'm trying to get back into making more weapons again. So these kakaurua, heru. This is a collaboration work with the name slipped my mind, but an amazing Alaskan jeweler whose work is narrative driven, and so while I was in a residency
Denise Wallace,
Denise, while I was in Oregon at a workshop with her about 5 years ago when I had a residency at Olympia, I was up one night and I saw our moon maiden. So I quickly smacked out a piece the next day, and that was a piece that she made a bezel for. Yeah,
she's a great artist too.
Oh yeah, she's brilliant. And so I'll just skip through a range of so these are.
That's a beautiful piece. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a fascination with whale's teeth. It really, really is one of our rangatira materials, I believe. And so I spend a lot of time just trying, like detail for me, the execution of a work and doing the best that you can, I think is really important. Because actually, if you go to museum collections and you look at what our tupuna did with stone and sandstone, they really set the bar. So I kind of see it as a personal challenge to rise to the occasion, because I consider that that toi tangata, those examples of their artistic enterprise that they left is a challenge to us to not only match but to exceed. And so for a long time now, I'll go to extraordinary lengths to spend the time that it takes to create a work that will become a legacy piece. And I have an expectation that that's a challenge left for whoever's coming after me to kind of go, okay, come on, bring it on. It's not I don't expect you to be beating me. I expect you to be rising and beat your own limitations and try to do something, amazing. So a lot of the time people go, oh, how do you do that? How do you do this? And it's because when I design, the materials or the tools that we have actually can't execute them. So, and I give examples by if we get further along. So this is this piece was a whale tooth that was sent to me to make a toko out of, and there was a kōrero around the kahu. So I shaped a hawk out of it. But doing all of these cuts and then doing all of the notch work in it. I mean, I think I spent 4 days just doing all of those notches, and then this work here, just getting each one of those things. And you can't do this with conventional tools, and I know that because what I do is I get jeweler's files and then I recut them and reshape them. So the challenge is that you should be designing things without being limited to the tools that you've got. And then once you've drawn something up, the challenge then is how do you execute it? And that might mean that you actually have to go, okay, I'm going to get my jeweler's files and I'm going to reshape them and cut them so fine that I can actually get in there and get those corners or get that angle and get around that curve. And that's the only way in which you'll do work that pushes past the present boundaries. So you see a lot of pieces here where I've cut the wild tooth in half and I've created pairs and whenever I'm doing pairs, usually I always I will never sell them separate. They're meant to be with a couple or with a brother and sister or whatever. So I hold on to those works until there's someone that comes along and goes, oh, I need 2 pieces. So, and this is another example for of those chevron works where you can't do this with conventional tools. You have to recut your files. You have to develop new techniques with strips of sandpaper to sand. And, it's just little things like that, thinking outside the square. Don't be limited. I suppose that's one of the things about like chevron works, for instance, is that no one was there to teach me. So I didn't actually have to pick up a technique that was already established and then dismantle it. I had to sit there and go, okay, how am I going to do this and figure it out? And so by figuring it out yourself, you end up, you don't have any rules. The only rules that you've got are the limitations.
You end up creating, eh?
Yeah. So, one of the challenges therein lies is that as practitioners, if you're a practitioner, start looking at your tools, because sometimes it's your tools that are your limitations.
Yes.
And how might you change the tools in your practice or your technique or your methodologies that invent and create new expressions. And this piece is a whale tooth heitiki that's got. When I went to Aussie, I picked up these opals and then got a friend to cut them to size to fit this particular one. So it's going into their collection. They're going to be buying it as soon as I get the aho on it. But I think the other thing is that I never work on one piece at a time. I've got probably 30 or 40 pieces that are sitting around, and by giving works time to sit, you see them, and while you're doing other work, and then if you're working on other mediums, you get new ideas, and then you come back and you see something, and you go, oh, I've got a new idea for that. And so that gives me the opportunity then to go, oh, that's going to be an interesting or a new departure for something new. I mean, it's probably, if I was to give any advice to people today, is to actually be fearless and diversify your skill base. I think that if you diversify your skill base, I mean, it was a necessity for me 25, 35 years ago to diversify, because I couldn't make a living off wood carving. You probably could quite easily now, but there are so many opportunities out there for Māori artistic enterprise now that as long as you've got good design skills and got a fairly solid technical skill base, that you can, I'd argue you can pretty much do anything. The limitations, only thing that stops you is your brain, is your own insecurities. Yeah, yourself. I mean, I suppose traveling to the US has opened me up to using beads a lot more in my work, just trying to change things up. I mean, in New Zealand, we kind of have a thing about tradition, whereas if you go to Santa Fe and to the southwest, they're not hung up on anything, and they're not scared to wear a bunch of amulets, maybe an assemblage made into one piece, but they're not intimidated by wearing large silver and bejeweled pieces at all. And so one time when I went over there, I was just like astounded, because you got these old collectors, or not old, but they, you know, like collectors in the Southwest who love creative expression, and are not prepared to spend the money that they've made in their lives on wearing, you know, these amazing things. So I was, to be honest, I was a little, I was astounded really at what they were prepared to wear. It didn't seem to blow them. It didn't seem to blow them away at all that they could wear something like this big on them, and they'd have stuff on their belts, you know, because there's a deep tradition there of silversmithing and using jewels and all that sort of stuff. So all of that stuff changes your perspective. So I agree with Darcy. And actually, it's a plug that I want to put in for Toi Māori. That, you know, when I had my residency in Hawaii, I realized then just how important Toi Māori was as an agency, one that actually held us together and kept us in relationship with each other, the different art forms, but just actually the Māori arts community. I think it's really, really important, and advocates for us and facilitates the ability for us to be able to hold exchanges and hold relationships with other communities that are similarly or like-minded as us. I went to Hawaii, and I sat there listening to people talk at this big exhibition one night that I went to, and I remembered that the kind of the nitpicking and kind of backbiting conversations that I was hearing amongst the people that were at the exhibition was what I used to hear in New Zealand 30 years ago. And I suddenly remembered what it's like now to have a fraternity of our community that are committed to the arts, that for the most part work together for our collective benefit. And so I just want to remind us that actually there was a time there where it was like that in New Zealand, and I think through some visionary thinking by people, and we carry it now as a norm, that actually Toi Māori is really, really important, because there still isn't any other agencies like that anywhere else amongst any of our other Indigenous groups that we have those sorts of relationships with. So I just want to remind us of that, because Toi Māori is actually, in my mind, a really, really pivotal agency that actually holds us and facilitates us bringing our dreams to there's Lindy.
To fruition, yes.
To fruition. Denise is going to kill me if she hears that I've forgotten her name. Anyhow, I'm just going to roll through these. These are just well-teed pieces.
So you can tell that Darcy distracted you. I know.
I want to stop sharing. I can see that we're close to the time. Happy to. I think we'd be happy to take any questions. It doesn't look like there's any on the chat, but if you've got some, I'll hand it back to you, Regan.
Oh, tēnā koe Rangi, truly inspirational. And the mahi I have no idea the hours that you find to create that work. It's truly amazing. Thank you, Rangi, for sharing. One of my friends once said to me, actually, when I was at art school, we were discussing how you develop a style, and he said, well, I've figured it out. You paint or you do 100 works, and then you do 100 more. And Darcy and Rangi, both of you, I can see, that's what you do, is you just
No, can I tell you the secret? Can I tell you the secret?
You let him tell you the secret, because I got one too.
Yeah, okay. It was I learned from Pablo Picasso that great artists steal ideas and bad ones copy them. Okay, so you have to find as many ideas as you can that you can steal, and you put them into your own framework, and you can create anything at all that opens the whole world of knowledge to you. okay, where you take stuff and you put it in and you reflect your journey through life. So it's important that artists don't be afraid of that journey, and that they steal as many ideas as they can and they put it together. And I mean, Rangi just gave us a whole lot of wonderful stuff there. Okay, that's brilliant work, Rangi. I haven't seen a lot of your stuff for a long time, but all that work there, that's hard effort, you know. But he would have stolen a few ideas from someone else. It's just little stuff you find, you think, hell, I can adjust that to do this, and it all comes out. But what the end result is that we now know what a Rangi Kipa artwork looks like, you know. And if I was a smart artist, I would not try and compete with him. I would move totally sideways, okay, and steal some of his ideas and put it into my work.
And my technique is actually, I went back and looked at customary examples and I copied them, and then I changed one thing.
That means you stole their idea.
That's exactly it.
And it's legitimate.
So, yeah, and I copy. I mean, that's our ancestry, right? That's our privilege. And then I change it, and then the next one I did is I changed something else, and then I change it, and eventually you end up having your own stylings. And actually, I just got there one day. I wasn't intending to do that. I just had, I didn't want to obviously continue to replicate the same thing, or you must just give that to a CNC machine. But moving it on, and same with the chevron work. I mean, the chevron idea is an amazing idea. And so I just went back and looked at the old stuff that the old people did. I don't know what they were smoking, but it was good stuff. So, and then moving it on, you know.
But you know, Dempsey Bob, eh?
Yeah.
Well, Dempsey Bob, I was over there and he had all these artists. It was a meeting of all the top American and Canadian artists. And he introduced me to all his people. There must have been about 150 of them there. And he said, this is Darcy Nicholas. He's a Maori. He's come here to steal all your ideas. And they all laughed, and he said, and now what we do is we go back to his country and we'll steal all their ideas back again. So it's a joke we shared amongst each other, right?
Well, that's the beautiful thing. And then you incorporate them and refine them in your own way. So beautiful. We did have a partai, Darcy, someone asked why you were in Melbourne and when were you there?
Why was I in Melbourne?
Yeah. Why were you in Melbourne?
Choose Melbourne.
Oh, I went there because at the time I was in the police, and the only way you could stop being a police officer was to take a year's leave without pay, and it had to be overseas. So I picked Melbourne because I knew it was one of the creative sort of art places of Australia. And I just happened to come across a man, Charles, I forget his name, who had a gallery, and he's now currently one of Australia's top artists. But the other thing I found out about Charles is he was a key part in the Australian mafia, and he wanted me to exhibit at his place, and a couple of Australian artists said to me, hey, no, you don't get involved in that. And I realized I had to come home because I'd gotten involved in this stuff. So I came home and working on the encouragement he gave me, I continued sort of with my art career. But he gave me the confidence to make the step I always wanted to make, which was to go back into my art full time. And then I got shoulder tapped into a whole range of other things, including reviewing the Department of Maori Affairs and restructuring and creating all the runanga all the way up from Wellington up to North Taranaki, Ngāti Tama, so they could make their land claims. And I love doing that because they're now a flourishing industry, and they need to focus though back on to our people, how they can help our people, rather than just building their asset richness, you know. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff we need to all work back together. Right across the country, you have Maori sort of saying, well, we're going to build our wealth, and they become billion-dollar industries. And you say, well, hold on, what about the old people? Who's looking after our old people? Who's looking after our young people? Who's looking after the homeless? And that's why I've gotten involved in all this other stuff, because I have to say, well, who is looking after our homeless, you know? It's the role of those people. Like I'm a comfortable house and there with no mortgages. It's the role of people like myself to go there and advocate for them. So I'll go anywhere. I've got access to anyone in this country, and I'll make sure I do as mana whenua. We are mana whenua. So you are required to talk to me about this problem we have for our people. And that's what artists get involved in. You know, they have been for generations here, thinking outside the square and dream of a better world for us.
Right, that's so true. You know, motivating our people and uplifting. The time is for change. Rangi, I just Gabriel Bells gave you a shout out and a big mihi for mentioning Toi Māori. And you know, there's a lot of mahi that happens behind the scenes. A lot of passionate people, often unpaid as well, and voluntary work that is important to acknowledge because it is about a movement of people. And Lindley Logan from over in the States.
Yeah, I see that. She's going to kill me, man.
She's still mates with my dear friend Lillian Pitt.
Yeah.
So say Lillian distracted you. Lillian and Darcy distracted you.
They're all watching.
Yeah, Lillian's my sister from another mother. We've known each other for many years.
Well, with that, Ehuama, it's past 1 o'clock. Do you have anything final you'd like to say before we wrap up the session today?
I'm just going to say it's been nice seeing you all. I'm actually going to have to rush off. I've actually got a meeting with the police at Mahunga Bay, and I don't want anything bad to happen. I've got to see them at 2 o'clock, and I told them I will be there. But I'm aware that some of our people are pretty tough warriors, and I said, don't fight, for God's sake. I have to take off. Yeah. So hey, Rangi, touch base. No, thanks,
Yep.
Regan. Nice meeting you all. Yeah, I have to take off. Yeah, I hadn't realised the time. Okay. All the best.
Thank you.
Yep.
Lovely
Thank you,
to
Regan.
have you both today. Thank you so much, Darcy and Rangi. Ka mihi nui ka kōrua.
Kia ora.